Hello and welcome back to IndustryBroadcast.com for audio article number 98. Today's audio article was written by Joris Dormans. Joris was a lecturer of new media theory and game design at Avon's College Breda and is currently a lecturer of game design, human-centered design, and interactive narrative at the Hogeschool van Amsterdam. On top of his academic life, he is also an independent game designer of the digital as well as traditional variety. To check out more of his articles, book reviews, and a rundown on what projects he has on the go right now, head over to JorisDormans.nl. Audio article number 98, titled The Art of Jumping, written by Joris Dormans and read aloud by Ryan Wienko on the 16th of April, 2009. Introduction. When Shigeru Miyamoto designed Donkey Kong, he invented a new genre of computer games. The platform game where the player jumps around a two-dimensional game world, dodging various pits and pendulums, became a recipe, one which many successful games were based throughout the 80s and early 90s. With the rise of 3D games in general, and the first-person shooter genre in particular, the classic platform game has lost its edge. Gamers have moved on, and the release of new platform games is a rare occasion these days. Still, the genre lives on in many ways. A lot of games on mobile consoles, PDAs, and smartphones are still 2D, and the platform genre thrives on these gadgets. However, how long this is to be remains to be seen. The technology is making giant strides forward, and I doubt it will take long before most of these games have also moved to 3D. Next, there are retro games and retro gamers who keep the genre alive. Retro gaming has become a trend that is recognized by gaming magazines and scholars alike. The classic platform games are one of many game genres to be rediscovered. Old-school fans still produce platform games in order to satisfy their appetite for new and original titles. The freely available and fiendishly difficult game Eternal Daughter is an example of this. Finally, the typical action and gameplay of platform games lives on in some series that have made a successful move into the 3D arena, Super Mario, Prince of Persia, and has spawned a new series, Tomb Raider. In this article, I will investigate the popular appeal of the 2D platform game during the genre's heyday. What are the critical and essential elements of the typical platform game? It is my view that the answer must be looked for in the particular blend of platform gameplay. I think the kinesthetic pleasure of moving and timing is what enthralls the player to keep on playing and keep on coming back, especially when this is tied in closely with the design of levels and a form of storytelling that builds on the archetypical quest. Gameplay. Before we can proceed to analyze platform games, we need to define the ever-elusive notion of gameplay. As most gamers will testify, gameplay is a crucial element of any game. A game can look and sound fantastic. Without half-decent gameplay, it will still be poorly received. Yet what this gameplay entails is more difficult to pin down. In Rules of Play, Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman define gameplay as the formalized interaction that occurs when the player follows the rules of a game and experiences its systems through play. 3 elements in this definition are essential. First being that gameplay is an interaction between player and game. Second, it is formalized and follows rules. And third, it is an experience through play. Most accounts of games and gameplay acknowledge the interaction first. In fact, interaction is often postulated as one of the defining aspects of games. The fact that this interaction is formalized and follows rules, our second rule, is perhaps less obvious, but has been on the map since the writings of John Huizinga. It is, on the other hand, related to a illusory attitude. The gamer's volunteer submission to a set of rules that effectively limit her means for reaching an end, and, on the other hand, implies that it is something that can be designed. Finally, gameplay is the subjective experience of play. This is what probably makes the term so elusive, for it is hard to design this subjective experience for players whose tastes and skills vary. Gameplay is not only a subjective experience, it is also subjected to strong sentiments about quality. To a certain extent, all games have gameplay, but not all games have good gameplay. Good gameplay is often a subtle balance to many factors in a game. In The Art of Computer Game Design, Chris Crawford associates gameplay with the game's pace and the cognitive effort required by playing. A fast-paced game should not require too much cognitive effort, while a slow-paced game can ask more difficult decisions of the player. Games that strike a good balance between these two are said to contain good gameplay. In a Gamasutra article, Doug Church in 1999 stressed the importance of control and coherence. He illustrates this with the discussion of Super Mario 64, in which the player is given a sense of control by offering a very limited set of actions, but supporting them completely. Control is also one of the magic ingredients that sets Japanese game design apart from Western game design in Power Up. It is a point that returns throughout the book and is stressed by many game designers. Miyamoto is paraphrased to say, "Graphics, music, even characters and story mean little if play control isn't interesting and fun." The difference in Japanese and Western design philosophies is largely attributed to the difference in cultural status that early games enjoyed in Japan and the West. While the Western game business attracted engineers, computer scientists, and businessmen, the Japanese designers often had artistic backgrounds. Miyamoto holds a degree in industrial design and came to Nintendo with the idea of designing toys. Before he started designing games, he had worked on the case design of some of the company's earlier electronic games. When he started working on Donkey Kong, he had no real programming experience. Japanese designers brought a different mentality to game design than their Western counterparts. A lot of attention was paid to the interaction of the user with the game. This eye for detail is in stark contrast with the Western preoccupation with the technical side of designing games. Japanese-based designer Dylan Cuthbert sums it up: "We want the player to be happy, not for us, the designers, to be amused by pulling off programming tricks." The Japanese successes are focused games that were designed around a simple idea, or verb, as Pokemon's designer Satoshi Tajiri explains. Pac-Man is designed around the verb to eat, Pokemon around the verb to trade. Likewise, Mario games are of course designed around the verb to jump. Clearly, a large effort was made while designing the gameplay of those early platform games. But this effort alone does not explain the success of the genre. To understand that, we need to understand the peculiar balance of movement, timing, and exploration that makes up the gameplay. We need to answer the question, why is it fun to defeat your enemies by jumping on them? Thinking like Mario. You grasp the controller with renewed vigor as you make your way through the initial stages of the new level. The opponents are quickly disposed and you reach the door with ease. Now comes the arched hallway that has eluded you for such a long time. Getting past the first level's boss is already hard enough, but these flying heads that dance up and down in sinuous patterns are too fast and too many. There is little time to anticipate their trajectories, let alone try to hit them with your whip. You must rush in, dodging left and right, occasionally trying to jump over them. To no avail, you are hit time and time again by the fast and elusive critters. But then you find a spot in the hallway where you save. With only a few hit points left, it dawns upon you. If you hop from column to column, you stay out of their trajectories, and all of a sudden getting past this part is easy. You make it to the stairs and rush up the steps, only to discover more flying heads that run in new patterns which you fail to analyze in the few seconds that you have left. The previous paragraph illustrates a brief sequence of gameplay experiences in the game Castlevania. It illustrates some aspects of platform gameplay that contributes to the genre's appeal. First of all, playing a platform game is a strong embodied experience. A sense of immersion and agency is the providence of many games. When this is directed at your avatar on the screen or projected in the game world, it is a sense of telepresence that enthralls the player. You are not just playing a game, you get a sense of being there in the game world. You sense that you occupy a body in the virtual realm. This effect is most prominent in modern 3D games that present the game world as your avatar can see it. The player occupies the same space as the avatar. In platform games and so-called third-person games, where the avatar is visible on the screen, the feeling is only slightly less. In order to play these games, we need to direct our avatar past various traps and through a multitude of levels. The player's identification with the avatar is usually quite strong. Not all games offer such a strong sense of embodiment. Friedman in 2002 describes how players interact with strategy and simulation games, where the player needs to interact directly with the whole system at a time. This interaction is disembodied, all of the information provided by the game feeding directly into her awareness, almost as if they were direct cybernetic extensions of her body or brain. To learn to think like a computer is the way that Friedman describes the transcendental feeling of leaving one's body behind and achieving a cybernetic awareness of the game's simulation and its underlying systems. The embodiment of platform games does not necessarily mean human embodiment. In fact, it rarely does. Mario possesses a superhuman ability and stamina to jump around platforms. His favorite way to dispose of his enemies is by jumping on their heads, and has little to do with real-life physiology. Learning to control a body like this is as much an interface, or something other, as the disembodied trance of strategy games, but where the pleasure of disembodied experience comes from is the hyper-awareness that it requires from the player. The pleasure of the embodied experience is kinesthetic. It is the fun and the feeling of control and achievement that accompanies a series of well-executed moves that makes playing a platform game pleasurable. Jumping on turtles and beetles is a fun way of disposing of one's enemies, because it requires us to make the most of our excellence in moving our cybernetic body through the computer space. However, platform games do not deliver a purely embodied experience. The levels of a well-designed platform game are at the same time spatial puzzles for which the avatar and its movements is the key. As much as we have identified with the avatar, the player's external perspective is often instrumental in designing and resolving levels of the game. In the Castlevania example, it is no coincidence that the save spots coincide with the columns in the hallway. It is designed that way to provide the player with a clue to solve the particular problem of dodging the flying heads. Platform games make extensive use of this type of hints and clues. Learning to recognize the system of signs in a level is vital into conquering the level. Learning to think like Mario is to master the physical space that governs the game, to master the control of the avatar, and to understand how these interact. Flow. Victor Nicolette in 2004 details different types of obstacles that players encounter in platform games. These are pits. Pits are the terrain features that require skill and control to avoid. In their most simple form, these are the gaps between the platforms that the player must avoid. Pits do not change, and require a little control to navigate. Pendulums. Pendulums are obstacles that can only be safely navigated at regular intervals. These add a factor of timing to the control required by the pit. Unstable floors. These are obstacles that are saved only for a short while, putting pressure on the player to get past the obstacles quickly. These elements are combined in complex patterns to form levels and obstacles of increasing difficulty. Nicolette does not discuss enemy characters in his article. Many enemies behave just like a pit, a pendulum, or an unstable floor, or a combination of the three. Enemies in other platform games show more complex and sometimes autonomous behavior, or introduce a different gameplay altogether. An example of the latter are the guards in Prince of Persia. The swords duels the player's fights with them cannot be understood as pit, pendulum, or unstable floor. Examples of the former can be found in abundance in Oddworld's Abe's Exodus, in which the enemies operate as agents, which behavior is to a certain extent predictable but never fixed in preset patterns. Such enemies cannot be defeated by discovering the correct series of moves, but require the player to react quickly to the moves of the enemy, a type of control reserved for confrontations with level bosses in most earlier games. Still, the fixed and predictable obstacles and the autonomous enemies are both overcome by the player who masters the control of the avatar. She needs to be able to execute the jumps with pixel-perfect timing. Levels increasingly challenge the player's dexterity and timing, often by stringing series of obstacles together, increasing the difficulty by putting more and more pressure on the player to perform long series of moves without a pause or a rest. In fact, one might argue that well-designed platform games trains its players not unlike students of martial arts are trained. The earlier and easier levels let the player experiment with basic movement techniques. The player is given a chance to hone her skill with individual technique, Kihon, before she is required to execute it within individual moves to form combinations of moves required to overcome the obstacle, kata. The sequences from Donkey Kong Country 2 are perfect examples of this concept, and show how jumps evolve into control and timing into rhythm. These sequences prepare the player for more open duels with the enemies at later stages, in which the behavior of the opponent grows increasingly more difficult to predict. Kumite. A role typically played by level bosses, whose behavior indeed grows more intelligent and unpredictable with each stage. The link between games and martial arts practice and philosophy is also described briefly by Chris Kohler when he discusses the notion of flow, taken from the martial arts book, The Book of Five Rings. Flow is a key element in immersion and amounts to perfect aesthetic experience, a more or less altered state of perception in which movements combine seamlessly with the other elements of the game. In this state, the player's experience of movement is almost physical, which explains the kinesthetic thrill of executing a series of well-executed moves, ending in the jump that kills the enemy by landing on its head. The state of flow can also be related to the most awkward of Roger Saillois' four fundamental categories of play. In Lynx, the category is described as playing with the physical sensations of vertical. When understood as such, it seems to have little relevance to many types of games. But when vertigo is extended to include sensations such as the vertigo of speed and physical sensations as described above, Lynx describes the pleasure of playing platform games better than Saillois' other categories: Agon, competition, alia, chance, and mimicry, role-playing. Discovery. Flow, as discussed above, is not unique to platform games. The link with martial arts practices should make it obvious that also fighting games share this element. However, platform games combine flow with another important element: discovery. Platform games are also games of exploration. The object of the game is not to score points and set a new high score, nor is it to defeat as many enemies as possible. Rather, it is to reach the end of the level, and ultimately to reach the end of the game. Platform games are games of exploration and spatial puzzles that need to be discovered and solved before the player can progress to the next level. In this section I will investigate this element of platform games. In the first platform games, the levels were the same size as the computer screen. Although these games often proceeded through several levels, with the development of the side-scrolling games such as Super Mario Bros. Or Eternal Daughter, or the games that combine many static screens into a single level, such as Prince of Persia or Oddworld, the games expanded to huge sizes. This expansion also led to the introduction of save points, or locations where the player could save her progress, which in turn enabled designers to increase the difficulty of the challenges imposed on the player. The introduction of levels with multiple exits opened up the possibility for non-linear gameplay. Other games required the player to backtrack and reinvestigate old levels, which adds a new dimension to level design and gameplay. As the player traverses the game world, she familiarizes herself with it. She uncovers its many secrets, and she learns how to read its signs, which prepares her for more complex puzzles and helps her find better hidden but vital resources. Secrets. Secrets rely on limited visibility. It involves hidden passages or resources which are difficult to spot or hidden just outside the visual range of the player. In a basic labyrinth, the secret that needs to be uncovered is the route through the level. Usually not all secrets need to be solved to reach the end of the level. Secrets are frequently used to hide resources that make the progression through the level easier, or provide the inquisitive player with shortcuts past otherwise lengthy and difficult parts of the level. A simple secret is found in the first level of Prince of Persia. The spot above a location in the ceiling is an unstable floor that can be destroyed by the player by jumping into it. It reveals a new pathway that yields a healing potion. The visibility of this passage is limited. The floor is drawn slightly different than the solid stone slabs on the left or the right. The player can find this spot by jumping into the ceiling at a different spot, after which the unstable floor slightly trembles. Tests. Tests challenge the player's level of control by making certain places hard to reach. Tests consist of the obstacles discussed above, including enemy characters. Tests are dominant in the levels of earlier and skill-based platform games, but all platform games make use of tests at one point or another. Not all tests need to be overcome to finish the level. Sometimes a test only rewards the player with extra resources. When a player activates a trigger, a new pathway opens up. The trigger usually requires the player to navigate the same space twice. A special type of trigger are the keys collected by the player that unlock pathways. The raised floor is a trigger that opens a gate. It is activated by stepping on it. In Prince of Persia, these triggers are timed and the gates close again after a few seconds. And the triggers are not always next to the gate. This feature is frequently used to put the player under pressure to reach the gate in time, increasing the difficulty of the obstacles that lie between the trigger and the gate. There are no keys in Prince of Persia, although the sword functions as one. In order to defeat a guard, the player needs to collect a sword. This requires the player to traverse screens twice, once on her way to the sword and once on her way to the exit. Riddles. Riddles poses the player with a problem or a puzzle, for which the answer is not immediately apparent, but for which some clues are provided. In Prince of Persia, there is only one true riddle in the entire game. It is built up through several levels. In level 4, the player is blocked by a mysterious mirror, which can only be navigated by jumping through it. These actions freeze the player's mirror image. The mirror image appears a few times to hinder the player. In level 5, it steals a potion that would give the player more hit points, and at level 6, it blocks the player, forcing him to fall back down into a dungeon and the next level. In the last level, the player is confronted by the mirror image, and, as well with all the enemies, immediately draws his sword. However, the mirror image is impossible to defeat, as hitting it only hurts the player. The solution is a problem for the player to put away his sword, and its image will mirror him, after which the player and its mirror image are reunited. This solution is unprecedented. No other enemies can be defeated in this way, and needs to be deduced by the player from the fact that he is fighting his mirror image. Riddles are more frequent in adventure or story-driven games than they are in action-based games, such as Prince of Persia. This rarity is partly explained by the fact that they are almost always implemented as special case rules. Such rules are costly. All of them need to be programmed individually, and this takes up time and, for older games, valuable disk space. Levels designed from generic elements that have pre-programmed behaviors are more efficient. However, riddles do add a lot of flavor to the game, and Prince of Persia's mirror image is a memorable example. Again, these elemental types are often combined to make varied and complex levels. We already saw one of those combinations with a sword that acts as a trigger or a key, which is required to pass the test of defeating a guard, and which is the core design behind level 1. The secret passage in level 1 is the most important subsection. It can be opened by destroying the unstable floor, and it involves tests as well, spikes and the guard, and a trigger. The most important hint the player gets is by climbing up from the screen. In this screen, the player can see the passage, but cannot reach it. The potion is positioned as an incentive for the player to find the passage. Finally, there are some passages below, which are relatively easy to find, but which yield only a single potion. The first level of Prince of Persia is relatively simple, and features only one exit. In fact, the whole gameplay of Prince of Persia is pretty straightforward. No other level sports a secret passage as in the first level, although the puzzles and the tests become increasingly more difficult to solve. However, Prince of Persia does make good use of letting the player see certain parts of the level before he can reach it, rewarding those players who pay attention to the level layout and design. Levels of platform games can become quite complex. Levels can have multiple exits, several secret sections, or games can require the player to traverse the same level again after some minor changes have been made. Every time the player re-enters the level, she embarks on a journey of discovery. New levels have new secrets to be discovered, new sights to be seen, and new types of play to master. Travel in a platform game can in itself form a source of pleasure, not unlike the kind of pleasure a real-world traveler experiences. For Maik Lohort, the type of play and pleasure that stems from the discovery and progression is reason enough to extend Roger Célois' dimension of gameplay with a fifth, réponse or surprise. Réponse is differentiated from aléa, which is chance, because it rewards the player that has a high level of mastery of the game and uses this to her benefit. Transcendence. Both the dimensions of flow and discovery share a common trait. Both incorporate a learning curve. As the player progresses through the game, the tests become increasingly difficult, and the discovery of the secrets and the solving of the riddles becomes increasingly important. Towards the end of the game, it tends to become so difficult that the player will have to rely on all of her skills just to finish it. A well-designed game makes good use of this double learning curve to add extra depth to its levels and design, especially when it manages to tie the double learning curve with some sort of narrative development or quest. Most platform games have a story element that sets up goals for the character. Usually the story element takes a form of a basic quest. The supply of virtual princesses needed to be saved is endless. It is also the final goal of Prince of Persia. The story frame of the quest is convenient, as it is straightforward and taps into well-known discourse of fairy tales and supports the linear gameplay of the hero that overcomes many obstacles. But the straightforward character of the quest can be deceiving, and its structure is often all too well undeservingly dismissed as a primitive form of storytelling. The quintessential quest stories are described by Joseph Campbell in 1949 as also stories about the spiritual growth of a hero. By overcoming the obstacles, the hero of the quest also grows as a person and learns about her role and position in life. This part of the typical quest is associated with the spiritual coming of age of the hero. Frequently the hero starts out as an adolescent and ends the story as an adult. By overcoming the obstacles, he, for Campbell's heroes are almost always male, learns who he is and what his role is in life. Although the full cycle of Campbell's hero myth also includes the hero's stay in the realm of adventure and subsequent return to the normal world, game quests favor the part where the hero is tested. Obviously, this can be explained by the ease by which these tests are translated into a game, and partly because the average age of the game audience. However, it would be interesting to see games that attempt to incorporate more and different paths of the full cycle. In a game quest, there is little doubt that the hero will inevitably save the princess. There is no real need to design an interactive story that includes many different endings to the same quest. Design effort is better directed at the question how the hero reaches the conclusion of her quest, and how this might contribute to different experiences of closure. What has she learned while being tested? In what ways did she grow? The quest story ultimately is a story of transcendence, and it is therefore more interesting to reflect and include this growth in the game. Character growth is not uncommon in games. The character growth is reflected directly by the increase of various statistics, such as strength, dexterity, or charisma. Frequently, the player can only complete a game when her character has grown sufficiently strong. This and similar mechanisms originate from role-playing games that for long have incorporated intricate systems that reflect a character's experience and powers, up to the point that the labels role-playing have come to mean statistic-based character building. Platform games have traditionally offered an alternative to this type of growth in games. A strong advocate of this view is again Shigeru Miyamoto. He has expressed a strong dislike of role-playing games, and tries to create games in which the players themselves grow. In many of his games, growth is first of all incorporated by creating levels in which the player needs to rely on an increasingly higher level of control over his body. This way the growth is not reflected or simulated directly, but becomes an aspect of the gameplay itself. If growth is reflected within the game, its dominant forms are new powers that directly affect the gameplay, rather than the abstract measures such as strength or dexterity. Sometimes this process is interrupted by giving the player a different avatar to control, as is the case with Rattle Battle level of Donkey Kong Island 2. Eternal Daughter is a good example of making use of this type of growth. In this game, the player controls Mia, who sets out to resolve her world that is overrun with the evil Dungaga. From the start of the game, it becomes clear that the powers of Mia's mysterious father are also bestowed on his daughter. Throughout the game, Mia develops her strength and powers. This is reflected by the number of health points and attack strength, but also by special weapons and moves that she discovers as she makes her way through the world. As the story unfolds, Mia grows from a simple human girl into a powerful woman that defeats the evil powers and reunites the different people she encounters. Eternal Daughter makes clever use of the levels and makes sure the player traverses them several times. Many levels have multiple exits, and the order in which some of the quests can be solved is nonlinear. So, traveling from level to level and finding all of the exits is an important part of the game. Furthermore, the powers gained from each quest give Mia new moves that allow her to reach previously unreachable sections of the world. She learns how to double jump once more while in the air, wall jump up against a wall and then jumping again, and slide, useful to get through small holes. When used in old levels, these moves can uncover new secrets. For example, early in the game, just after Mia reaches the Lorraine Forest, there is a way to jump up that in the beginning of the game she cannot reach. Only after she learns the wall jump can she get the resource that lie beyond this new path. The quest of Eternal Daughter ties in directly with the gameplay, with the control and the flow of the superhuman computer-mediated body, and with discovery of a wonderful world. It is platform gaming at its best. The player and Mia journey through the land together, and both grow into the hero role. Slowly the quest is resolved, and what matters is not that the world is saved in the end, but the experience of saving it is what counts. As they travel together, Mia and the player have met colorful characters and have seen wonderful sights. They have learned to use their powers, and in the process they have respectively become a better woman and a better player of the game. And who knows, maybe the player has picked up something besides a pixel-perfect timing and a perfect understanding of a fictional world. Platform games today. With the advent of the first-person shooter in the 1990s, the genre of the 2D platform game has slowly faded away. But platform gaming lives on. The 3D descendants of the 2D platform games, such as Tomb Raider and the latest installment of Prince of Persia, are successful enough, but in my opinion lack a certain quality. It might be that the mix of control and discovery and quest is not quite optimal in these games. Lara Croft definitely is notoriously difficult to control, making flow a rare occasion in the game. Most 3D platform games struggle to balance between a fairly abstract gameplay on one hand, superhuman jumping, and the standards of realism set by first-person shooters on the other. The first-person shooter themselves also build on similar mixes of elements. Some of them are direct descendants of the platform game, Duke Nukem for example. The potent mix of control, discovery, and quest is apparent in the best of them. The game flow is the result of finding the correct rhythm of reloading your weapons in Half-Life, and doing rocket jumps in Quake. Growing your cyborg body to fit your chosen role in Deus Ex are but a few examples. However, without the fantastic and colorful worlds of 2D platform games, the storytelling in these newer games started to follow the conventional patterns of storytelling of your average Hollywood science fiction thriller. As a result, a very interesting aspect of the 2D platform game, the quest that is really integrated within the gameplay, remains relatively underdeveloped. This concludes audio article number 98. Once again, written by Joris Dormans, whose blog can be found at www.JorisDormans.nl. As always, we recommend that you check back frequently to IndustryBroadcast.com, as we do our oh-so-very best to update the site on a regular basis, bringing the collective insight of the gaming industry to your ears.